Welcome to Antarctica Did That For Me. We're a podcast for everyday people with a little adventure in their hearts. We're Keri and Cassa, and we've spent huge chunks of our time living and working in Antarctica. Welcome to a journey that changed our lives. We hope it will change yours too. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Antarctica Did That For Me. My name is Keri Nelson. I've worked in Antarctica for 16 years and happy to have my co-host here who is...
Cassa Grant. Also, I did not work there for 16 years, but about 5. So yes.
So we're happy to be doing this Antarctica podcast together. And today we are talking about something I think we both have a lot to say about, which is surprising things, 7 surprising things precisely that Antarcticans do differently. Antarctica people really are kind of everyday people. Both Cassa and I came from very small roots. We're both essentially farm girls, or at least very rural America girls. And so we're just kind of rural America people out here in the world doing everyday things. But the people in Antarctica are also everyday people, but they're not doing everyday things at this moment. So how, why, what makes those people different? I think some of those people that I know in Antarctica are still, even when they're not the most dynamic person I've met. I meet them in Antarctica. I know that of the group of people that they left at home, they are still probably the most interesting people of that group of people that they know. Something that they've done, even in my perception that they aren't the most interesting person in the world, they're still very interesting people. So what is it that they did that to get them to where they are right now? What are some things that make those people different? Cassa, you and I talked about this a little bit before we started this episode, and I know we've been chewing on that thought for a while. What do you think? What makes Antarcticans different?
I mean, I think it's first and foremost thinking differently, right? So they think about things in a different way than maybe people who haven't been down there for a variety of reasons, not just because, oh, I'm so special, I went to Antarctica. It's even thinking about the idea of, could I go down there for 4 months of the year, right? That's the fundamental thing of thinking a little bit differently, where a lot of people struggle to even think about that. So that's saying yes to this kind of disruption, I think, is one really important way that Antarcticans think differently. What do you think about that?
I think you're right. Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things that we are really seeking out as we do this podcast, we are looking for people who, like us, have had a little thought that there's something bigger in the world than where we were at. So for me, that was on a tiny little farm in Minnesota. For you, Cassa, it was in a small town in Montana. And I think that each of us maybe didn't know a lot of people. We just felt that thing in our heart that wanted to kind of go look for things or do different things. We didn't even know what they were. We didn't even know if anybody would even know what we were talking about when we talked about that little feeling in our heart. But both of us got there. We met through very small places, through very wending ways of life. And I think one of the ways that we did that, and one of the ways that our friends who we met there did that, was just hearing about something like Antarctica and saying yes to it. It doesn't have to be Antarctica for people, but in our particular case, it was, yes, I want to go see what this college is like that's not quite in my small town. Yes, I want to move to this city. It's a little bit different. I'll still be able to see my friends at school. Yes, yes, yes to those little instincts. Yes, eventually leads you, in our case, to Antarctica. In a lot of our Antarctican friends' case, to Antarctica. So that's what I'm talking about when I am talking about saying yes. Do you relate to that? Am I accurate about the way it was for you?
100%. I wish I had said that. No, it was great. And I agree. And I think it's that willingness to be uncomfortable. That's actually the second way that Antarcticans think differently, but it plays into this saying yes, right? Like this saying yes to be uncomfortable, the saying yes to stepping outside what you feel like maybe society expects of you, or things that you don't really know how to navigate. So yeah, completely
It's
agree
so
with that
hard.
one. It
It's
can be
so
really
hard,
challenging.
Cassa. I think for me, one of the hardest things in my life actually was to say there's people around me who don't understand what I'm talking about. I don't even know if they know the way this feels. It's really scary sometimes to say yes to those things.
Well, and I mean, yeah, leaving Montana was one of the scariest things I ever did. That was terrifying for me. I had no idea what to expect. Was, I mean, I was a teenager, so that also make it harder, but but it was
Yeah.
challenging. It was really, really scary,
Yeah.
and I think you kind of build that muscle for uncomfortableness as well. And so we all do that in different ways with different types of things, but being able to, again, like you were saying, follow that spark and understand which ones to follow and which ones are just kind of shiny objects. But the one that you need to follow is the one that keeps popping up. So whatever that might look like for people is different. So that's, I think that's something that Antarcticans have had to kind of condition themselves for. And ironically, people who go down there, I think for a really long time, start to become more comfortable in Antarctica physically, and then say no to other things that they should be pushing themselves to say no to. So
Are
that's
you looking at me right now,
no,
Cassa? It's
I'm
your
not.
spotlight trainer because it's true. I
I don't,
totally,
I'm thinking about
yes.
people that have been down there for like
Yeah.
20, 25 years, that kind of thing. It becomes so part of them that it's really hard then to go back into that space of saying yes to the new thing that's not actually Antarctica anymore. Oh,
I
meta.
love that you just said that. So we've got number one saying yes, and number two being willing to be uncomfortable with that
Mm-hmm.
saying yes. And I feel one of the reasons, this is a new podcast, obviously. And one of the reasons that's one of my motivations behind starting it is I have recently stopped working in Antarctica. And I think maybe I did get a little comfortable there. And this being willing to be uncomfortable, these lessons that we're talking about are hopefully going to lead me to the next part of my life that I love too. So you can be uncomfortable from a really cool place too, and need to start saying yes to other things more from this other place too. This isn't just a thing that leads you to Antarctica. I'm hoping this is leading to me to my next Antarctica, whatever that is too. But I love that being willing to
Mm-hmm.
be uncomfortable. You work your whole profession as being a business coach, a very in demand business coach. I know people who work with you love you. But I know that you had some other thoughts about some other things that Antarcticans do differently. This was a topic that you thought of. So, what's another thing that we can help people understand?
Well, I mean, all of these first three really play in together. So the next one would be looking for that willingness to pivot and to improvise. So this actually comes up in a couple of ways. I think that when we were thinking about this episode, I was thinking about things like um, reusing materials that we've used down there, for example. Like that's a very concrete example of, okay, I have this giant piece of cardboard, let me make some dinosaur bones out of it. Right? So it's kind of like, how do I use the things at hand in order to improvise the thing that I want to create? But it's that willingness to see new possibilities and new things out of whatever is at hand. So for me, for example, I think I've mentioned when I was a teacher, um, I loved my job. I was happy with my job, but I also wanted to do other things. And that was when I started driving this adventure travel bus. And it was very scary as well. But my priority was showing up for new things. So that's kind of helping yourself create that as a priority. Whereas sometimes that can feel um, not as important. So it's making sure that you actually are able to prioritize that. So again, it can show up in many different ways. It can show up in how do I want to pivot next year, or goals. A lot of people will do it around goals, but it's also just that creativity of possibility. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I'm so glad you brought this up about Antarcticans, because one thing that just really stands out to me from, and this is any Antarctic crew I've worked with in any season, is that there is always some left brain challenge that comes out of nowhere in a program like that.
Yes.
So maybe one year, hey, we're not going to get a fuel tanker down. So I don't know. Do you want to shut a station? Like, are we going to be able to get people in and out of here? If, there's a big challenges when you don't have fuel for a whole year. Or maybe one year our government shuts down. I was there during the very
Right.
first extremely problematic government shutdown years ago. Now it's just a way of life. But then, that was a big challenge. They hadn't figured out the finances of that yet. And you just saw people come up with incredibly creative solutions to things. They continue to get at. You mentioned in another episode an ice pier that is attempted to be built at McMurdo Station every year. Because of the geography of that area, it's hard to build a freestanding pier. And so they're always attempting to build this ice pier to get all the goods on and off. But that often cracks. That often is a very problematic thing to make. And you see people come down who have come out of, again, so many people in Antarctica are from small towns and from small communities, but they've come out, they've been the person in their town who's come up with those solutions for maybe, I don't know, the town hall that needed to fix, or maybe their own vehicle, whatever, they've put it together. I'm not saying these aren't expert people. They do know what they're doing, but they're thinking of ways to do things well, but also with solutions that nobody's had that problem before in the world. And so in that way, being willing to trust the new paradigm, which you were talking about, knowing that this is something that's going to happen, but being able to improvise in the middle of it, that is a way that Antarcticans, if they don't think that way, they are forced to learn how to think that way really quickly.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good one. And yeah, and it's basically seeing the problem as something that's going to get solved because there's no other choice than
There's
to
no
solve
other
it.
choice. It's only you. You
It might
better
be,
think of it.
it might be an imperfect solution.
Yeah.
And but it's going to get solved. And I think that that's a really important way that we think as well is like, how not it's not will we solve it, it's how are we going to solve it, or what can we do
Good
to
point.
get ourselves on the way to solving it, rather than pulling at our hair, etc. And not that people do that if they're not Antarcticans, but it really forces you in a very concrete way, like the ice spear is a great example of that, of how are we going to deal with this. These are the facts, this is the reality that we have around us right now, and so what are we going to make of it? And sometimes, again, that can be very confronting, because sometimes it's very easy to live in this kind of nebulous space of, like, my sister's a project manager, and I was at a project management conference a couple of weeks ago, and there was a guy talking about how yellow amber is his least favorite color, because it's kind of where we put things that we don't know what to do with them. And so what I mean by this is, when you're categorizing if a project is where things are at in a project, you're saying it's either done, working on it, or to do. And so a lot of things get categorized as working on it, but there's no real progress getting made. And that is the point here, is that the progress has to get made. Again, it might be imperfect, but it will get made. And again, like what you were saying too, using those tools that you have available more strategically. This is something that I love about my experience in Antarctica in particular is, obviously we have access to a lot of heavy machinery down there, and you just start to think about things way differently. Like when I was helping my brother dig a ditch in his yard, we were trying to get this ditch witch digger onto a trailer that he had, and it wasn't really quite working. The ramps were falling off, and I was like, you've got a digger, or you've got a tractor, let's just fork it. And you don't even, I wouldn't have even thought about that if I hadn't worked in Antarctica. So there's also that very practical and physical way of thinking about, how can we engineer this to save our bodies and to make it safer by using the tools that we have. And again, sometimes you're not going to have a tractor or whatever, but I think it made me a lot more creative about that than I was before.
That makes so much sense. I realized yesterday, that I was thinking like an Antarctican with limited resources, because in preparing for this podcast, I'm trying to light it so the sun isn't glaring in my eyes. And so I have taped up in here, basically janky ass contractor bags, kind of on hooks over my window. And my husband, Alex, is looking at me like, why don't we just buy blackout curtains? And I'm like, no, we got this with tape. And that's like literally what's up there right now, binder clips and tape. And it was such a pain to do, Cassa. And as I'm doing it, I'm like, oh, I'm thinking like an Antarctican, like, what's in the house? How can I make this
Yeah.
happen right now? Because I can't order anything because it's so far away. So I just realized, oh, I'm still thinking like an Antarctican, even in my own apartment.
I just think it's a good point, because that is the flip side of that thinking, is sometimes you get into that scarcity of thinking or choosing to do it a certain way when
there's better tools.
You don't really have to do it that way. But that's the thing, there is better tools. So it can, that one can be kind of a double-edged sword, can it?
I just realized that there's a very good example of me thinking like an Antarctican. I can't, in real life, I can't actually drop that, like, yeah, let's just jury rig this thing out. We got this. As we go to our list, I know if we're on number 4 or number 5 or number 3 right now, but I want to throw another one into the mix, which is just Antarcticans show up for things, for novel things especially. And when people show up for those things become beautiful and great. And McMurdo Station is the best example of this that I know in the world, except for maybe Burning Man. But Antarctica, if somebody has a spark of an idea and they want to make something happen, a band, an exercise class, a ballet, I think they did a full ballet at McMurdo, which was really impressive. All you need is to say you want to do it, hang up a sign, get some friends, they'll show up. And when all of you start getting excited, more people will show up and more people will show up. And suddenly you have a unique thing in the world. Ice Stock is maybe a good
Mhm.
example where there's 24 hours of live music, or not 24 hours, a full day of live music all day on New Year's Day in Antarctica at McMurdo Station. But there's other examples of stuff you'll never be able to make these creative, wonderful things again in your life. And so just participating and people showing up and your energy of being a participant and getting excited. I mean, gosh, this is what we're talking about on Antarctica did that for me. It's trying to make those lessons, a lesson like this, stick for anybody listening in real life. This is how you build a really great, and Antarcticans know how to do it. Antarcticans create a world of fun and play and creativity because people are willing to put their ideas out there. And secondly, people are willing to show up for them. Our world here, way out of Antarctica, can get a lot bigger if we start doing these things, folks. That's what I believe. That's why I'm yapping at you. I don't know, Cass. I see you nodding. I know you have things to add about all of this stuff or anything else.
I agree with that, and I think that the difference is that it's all about community too, because obviously those are both closed communities. The things that I mean, for all intents and purposes, the Burning Man and Antarctica are both relatively closed communities. So how do we create this sense of showing up for fun and showing up for this kind of novelty in wider communities? And I think that it's a very complex topic, but I think that for me, some of the recipe, the ingredients for success for that were also having this sense of I mean, Burning Man, they call it radical acceptance, but it's basically, you go with what's happening and you get excited about what's happening. But we also have fewer things going on to distract us in both of those places. And I think that's really important to
Good point.
bring up, right? Because we don't, I mean, maybe they do now a little bit more. It's been a long time since I've been to McMurdo, but we don't really have our phones distracting us. We don't really have, I mean, yes, you can watch TV, obviously, but it's more the snowball of creativity gets rolling, and it's almost like peer pressure to be involved with some of this stuff sometimes too, right? It depends on the group that you hang out with or the groups that you kind of mingle with, but I'm thinking of when we did the Step Up Antarctica movie. But we did the different workplaces, and it was really cool. Every single workplace did a dance number. I mean, dance would be kind of a loose, I'm doing air
It's
quotes here,
so
but it
good
was it
though.
was it was awesome. And really what was cool about it was that each department did, the people who wanted to participate did participate, and you still had pretty good representation of every department. So it's like I said, it's peer pressure a little bit. It's a little bit just that the way, this is how we do things. This is the culture that we've created, but it's also that kind of isolation that can help with that.
I love the point that you made about not everybody has the time, or that it takes a lot of, how do you do that in a busy life? Those were closed communities, and we had the same hours of social time, a lot of it, so that made it different. I think one of the things that we're encouraging people to do here is to understand that, just like adventure doesn't have to be a big move to Antarctica. It can be just opening yourself up to another community or another person who has an adventurous heart in your own small town. That's the start. The participation
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be, I'm going to make a ballet. Participation doesn't mean I want to try out to be in someone else's ballet. Participation doesn't even mean, even though I have social phobia, I'm showing up at that ballet, although that's a nice little thing to start with, and even within the small towns.
Mm-hmm.
But it might just be, if somebody posts about it, write an encouraging thing and say, we are so excited in this community you're doing this. Thanks for being a good person in this world. Or like, hey, we love this
Mm-hmm.
creativity. Participation takes a lot of different forms. Don't judge yourself for not participating in big, glitzy, glittery ways. That's for some people's personality
Yeah.
types, not everyone's. Participation can be really small
Mm-hmm.
too. I think, that's the people we're trying to talk to, are people who understand that.
And I agree. And I think that, it can look different for everyone. I mean, especially another thing that we haven't mentioned that I think that does come up. And I think that this is a really interesting aspect of this, is that in Antarctica, there are no children. Like, it's all adults down there. And so I think a lot of times when you have children, that gives you more permission to participate because you're doing it for them. But it's also like you reliving your, not necessarily your childhood, but just getting back into that sense of fun for the sake of them. But you can do that as an adult. I think that's my point, is that you can do that as an adult without kids. And that is part of what we're doing on the ice as well. So I think that that's also because a lot of times that's a good way to get into participation, because your priorities are going to change too. Like as your kids are little, you're going to be fully participating with them all the time. And then as they grow, there's different ways of doing that. And then as they leave, then you kind of create this other of participation that we're talking about too. So I think that's important to acknowledge. But yeah, that's a really good one. And then the final one that we wanted to talk about was safety. So safety comes up a lot. It's psychological safety at work, all of these kinds of things. But I'm talking about actually just straight up physical safety, because we have to be really, really careful down there. Obviously it's a pretty harsh environment, but also for me, especially with safety, I always thought, oh yeah, safety, whatever, pencil whip through the little checklist or whatever. And I mean, I cared. I was a bus driver. I was not unconscious. However, on the ice, it really helped me with just building it in more and really being conscious of it in a way that's intentional rather than like, oh, I should. And I think that's actually translated into a lot of my life now in terms of, again, psychological safety for myself and how I take care of myself. All of the things, not that I'm trying to be overly cautious, but just understanding that there are going to be consequences if I choose not to think about that type of safety. And that can show up in a lot of different ways. It's not something to just pay lip service to. It's something that you actually really take on, because people that you know and care about can get seriously hurt if you're not safety conscious. And accidents are going to happen even if you are safety conscious, which we've definitely experienced. But at least you know that you can look in the mirror and go, I did the best I could with what I had. And that to me was a huge thing that I took away from Antarctica, that I mean, again, I was definitely safety conscious in the context of the bus company I used to work for, but it became much more ingrained and much more natural and much more actually like fun and good
Oh, that's
because
such
of
a
my
good
experience in
point.
Antarctica.
No, Cassa, I really like the way that you talked about that, because I am the same way. I'm so much more safety conscious now than when I was there. And it's there, you go through safety trainings constantly, to the program's credit. You have a lot, you have required safety stretching in a lot of places, to the program's credit.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? But you really start focusing in on those things and realizing in the end, you're the one who's going to leave Antarctica if you're not careful. You're the one who's going to suffer these consequences permanently if you're not careful. Of course, down there, Antarcticans know that we are considered at the workplace 24 hours the whole time that we're there. So it makes you think about that in terms of, okay, what am I going to do tonight? Do I want to go on a hike? Well, I could walk this way, or I could not put these shoes on or put this better footwear on. But if I get hurt, it's still my job gone. It's still me off the ice. It's not like I'm going to linger here in this place and just be, hurt. No, probably they're going to need to find somebody else to do that job. It doesn't mean that there aren't things like, other systems for if you get injured on the job, but you're not going to be doing that job in a place you love. So it does really get hammered in, and it does translate. It's pretty good advice for the real world too, I think, psychologically and physically.
And I think for me too, like I said, it was also about, I want to make sure that I'm doing the best job that I can in general with what I have, but I really want to make sure that my people are safe, that the other people at other departments that I'm working with are safe. And that part of it was a big one for me, of just making sure that, again, not to be like some kind of Debbie Downer, like, that's not safe, guys. Sometimes you have to be that person, and it's okay. But down there, I feel like there is a lot more people being like, oh yeah, you're right. Like I do need to change my shoes, or I shouldn't be operating this scissor lift this way, or whatever. I mean, it's people get better. And that's psychological safety, having that feeling of being able to call somebody and go, hey man, can we just do it a little bit differently? Cause this seems a little unsafe to me, and go, oh yeah, you're right. Like that is such a great part of the culture that I really have taken with me, that I really appreciate. So
I like
yeah,
that.
the next part of this, though, we want to talk a little bit about was their actual personality qualities that are different about Antarcticans. So we've talked about the way that Antarcticans do things differently, and ways that we think differently. But do we feel like there's any kind of personality qualities that make Antarcticans different?
I kind of think For me personally, this is just kind of a knee-jerk reaction to this question, Cassa, because I'm just thinking aloud in the moment. But I think I see the swath of human personality in Antarctica. I don't. I think there are some people who might be more the extreme adventure type. There's a greater population of that type down there, but there are every other
Hmm.
personality type and every other age range and every other kind of demographic there could be. Is represented down there. Some are more represented than others, but I've met all the people. But the one thing that is different is that willingness to say yes to a thing, to fill out the application, to actually
Mm.
do the thing. And that does separate some people in this world, the non-Antarctica world, who I think would be great candidates to work in Antarctica. There's just that hesitation. I don't judge it because I've got hesitation for other things like that in my life where I'm just a little too scared. I'm trying to achieve that myself, but other than that, I don't think there is a lot of difference. What do you think? I'd be so interested to hear.
I mean, I love what you just said about that too, because I think that's also the fun of this stuff of like pushing yourself a little bit, but in little increments. I think that, and that's something that I really work with on myself and my clients. But yeah, no, I agree. I don't think that there is any kind of personality thing that makes a person more inclined to go down there or less inclined. And I have actually seen what I really like about my experience down there is that I've seen people who would consider themselves, I'm going to use the word shy, which has a whole bunch of things around it, but people who would say that they about themselves, I'm a shy person, really become like a very well-known member of the community down there for the reasons
Yes,
that we've discussed in this episode, but also because they were able to reinvent themselves with a new idea of who they really were based on that saying yes. And also it's that mindset. Like, so a lot of this is mindset, not necessarily personality. So I think that, a lot of times it's easy to say, well, I'm shy, or I'm not somebody who goes out and does stuff, or I mean, that's not really a thing to say, but that's too hard for me, or I like to be in my comfort zone. That's, we all do, but that willingness to say yes is a mindset around, well, let me just try this little thing. Let me just do a little baby step. I mean, it might not be a baby step at first, but it might not feel like that, but it can be
I
that
love
small,
that. I
basically.
love that, Casa.
Mm.
I appreciate that. And I think we're about at that time where I'm going to let that be our final thought for the day, unless you have anything else you want to add briefly. I just want to add a
No.
thank you to everybody who's listening, but also we're trying to give, when we remember to, a little bit of an activity for you to do before the next podcast. I'm saying call to action. My mom was like, I don't know what that is. You should call it something differently. So whatever. Here's what I'm going to offer you up as a challenge for you this week is to think about those times when you've been too scared to say yes to something or too just scared to even show up to something. No judgment, but just understand what that feeling is when it's happening, feel it, the tension and the fear, and then survive it. Survive that feeling, show up for the thing, have had that fear, and then gone to the thing or made that comment or started a thing, gone to a class, whatever it is. Understand that you survived that feeling. For extra credit, you actually show up at something. It doesn't have to be big, but start small. So anyway, that's my challenge for you, your heart, to just start to know yourself a little bit better so you can eventually get to having the life that you want. Anyway, thanks so much. And it's been great talking to you. Anything else, Cassa?
No, thanks again, Keri. This is good.
All right. Have a good one till the next episode. Thanks for listening to the Antarctica Did That For Me podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support our efforts, we would love it if you would tell your friends. And if you leave us a review on Spotify or Apple, it will help us find more of our fellow adventurers. We release a new episode every Tuesday, and we are a video and audio podcast, so you can watch or just listen. We're on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and more, or find everything, including links to our social media, at our website, antarcticadidthatforme.com. Thanks again for listening, and until next week, keep thinking about what opening your own heart to adventure could do for you.